Hello, this is Dr. Mike, and today we're going to talk about Chapter 6 of our text in developing developmental psychology, the cognitive and physical years of middle childhood, basically. I hope that you are finding these studies to be quite interesting and helpful, maybe. I said, I think yesterday that you would be able to apply these both as a parent and as a teacher, or in your career field as a nurse, even when you realize that you realize a certain age child will behave and have certain characteristics that will help you to understand them. And sometimes that's also very, very helpful. So as we go through these, be sure that you read the chapter, be sure that you absorb the information. You may not need it all now, you may not understand it all now, but you will have it to come back to when certain things come up that are worth your consideration. So let me share my screen with you now and give you the slides that we're going to talk about today. And I hope that you'll find some things here that will be very helpful to you in your career. So our chapter objectives in this one is to summarize Piaget's theory and information about cognitive growth in the middle childhood, talk about theories and tests. Remember, we're talking about the fact that in psychology, it's a bit different than other sciences where you can actually see things and touch them, put your hands on them. In psychology, much of it is not like that. You build models and you use those models to try to help you to understand. And you will end up taking most of these models, and a piece here and a piece there will provide understanding for different aspects of what we are talking about. We're going to talk about tests of intelligence, which has long been used as a measure in this area of progress in a child's life, and talk about gifted children, children with disabilities, and then academic skills, how they progress in childhood. And then we'll talk about physical development, physical fitness, impact of that, of sports on a child's growth psychologically, and what those things teach him or her. First, let's talk about cognitive development. We're talking about pretty much the processes of the brain and how they will work. And we'll talk about distinguishing characteristics of thought. During Piaget, remember his concrete operational and formal operational stages are the two stages that he sees in this period, and how children learn to use strategies and monitoring to improve learning and to improve memory. So his first stage, concrete operational period from 7 to 11 years. During that period, children become less egocentric or less self-centered and much more involved in social activities and other people. Children rarely confuse appearances with reality in this age. They can reverse their thinking. They can perform mental functions. They are cognitive things going on that are good. Children are able to resolve perspective taking and having a grasping conversation and realizing the idea of conservation. That is, they can see things, they can understand things that aren't visible. Let's put it that way. That might be the best way to understand that. Remember the ball and the blanket that children begin it with it as a kid. They have no concept. If they can't see it, it's not there. So if it's hidden, it's not present. So they, in this stage, you can begin to talk about things that you that are not physical, tangible, touchable kind of things, and children can follow that kind of thinking, and that's really important. Formal operational period, 11 years to adult, they can begin to reason more abstractly, hypothetically, understanding that a hypothetical problem doesn't have to correspond to the real world. And they can use deductive reasoning. They draw logical conclusions from the facts that they see. But it's important to note that Piaget overestimated the abilities of adolescents, at least in the minds of most psychologists. I probably would be more on his side than I would the other guys. I believe adolescents have a lot more abilities than we give them credit for, and they get a bad rap sometimes, especially as they get into the teenage years. And they're, we portray them as being, brain dead, basically from 13 to 21. That's not true. Young people, teenagers, have some really good skills that developed during that time, and they're trying to find themselves and a way to think about the world that they live in. And so I think it's a little unfair for us to be very hard on them, because they're struggling greatly to try to learn how they're going to function in this world. When we talk about information processing, psychologists believe that cognitive development proceeds by increasing the efficiency in which children process information. They learn to do it better. They learn better study habits. They learn how to spend time memorizing and things like that. One of the key features is the efficiency with which memory work is transferred from from short-term to long-term memory. The things that you first learn go into working memory, which is a type of memory in which a small number of items can be stored briefly, short-term. And then it gets transferred. I liken that to, two file cabinets. You have a small file cabinet. This is where you stick stuff when you're just trying to learn it quickly. And over time, the more you repeat it, the more you talk about it, the more it moves into that long term, which is a permanent storehouse for memories. And it has apparently unlimited capacity that you store in long-term memory every action, every sound, every word, every thought that you have heard from the time since you were birthed into the world. So that's quite a big file cabinet, right? And that stuff comes back out even, when you get to be in your 70s and you have dementia, maybe you talk about things in your childhood. And they're very much in there. They're very much still in your brain. So it's just amazing what people know that you don't forget. I have an uncle who's 91, and he can talk in detail about history, about people, about when they lived, when they died, what they were like. He had memories of what they looked like. And he's just a walking history book. And I love visiting with him because he has all these things in his mind that he loves to talk about. And he didn't have dementia as such, but he has a pretty clear memory. There are a lot of things that children begin to use memory strategies during this middle period, 7, 8 years. They use, find effective ways to learn, like rehearsal, repeating, repetition. You've heard that old saying, repetition aids learning. And so they learn to repeat something to yourself until you get it. The older they get, the more effective learning and memory strategies they will employ. Like organization, they learn to organize their notes and their things in ways that they can remember them. And elaboration, making something memorable by embellishing it or maybe associating it with something totally unusual away from the subject. Older children will make use of external aids for memory, like note taking, keeping a calendar. Those kind of things are all aids to memory. And you'll see as they get older, they'll begin to keep a calendar or schedule. When we talk about metacognition during the elementary years and adolescence, children learn to identify different kinds of memory problems and strategies that's most appropriate for each. Diagnosing memory problems accurately, monitoring the effectiveness of memory strategies are important elements of this idea of meta memory, or a child's intuitive understanding of memory. We talk about with the Greeks, the fact that the Greeks were the first to think about thinking, basically. That's true of children. They think about memory, they think about knowledge. And so we talk about metacognitive knowledge. This is a person's knowledge and their awareness of cognitive processes. And then we talk about cognitive self-regulation. This is identifying goals. You have a goal that you want to remember this passage by a certain time. You work on strategies, you monitor it effectively, and then you look at it and you'll find this true of most successful students. I mentioned to you, I think, the experience I had in 11th and 12th grade, where we had in both years in our English class, we had to memorize a long section of William Thanatopsis, and in 12th grade, a long section of Macbeth, Shakespeare's work, and we had to memorize the punctuation. I was 1974, 75. I was about 15, 16 years old. I just started working, so I guess I just turned 16. And on my job, I organized these sections of Shakespeare and Thanatopsis both years, and I put them on sticky notes. And stuck them on my machine so that when I'm working, doing some repetitive, boring task, I was working on my memorization and punctuation for those two pieces. As it turns out, that was 1974, 75. So we're talking about almost 50 years. I can still quote you both passages with the punctuation just to show you how enduring memory is. But these skills, this ability to, develop strategies actually increase with age. And there's really no reason why the human brain should descend in anarchy. A lot of the reason why we have Alzheimer's and dementia may be very well what we're eating, what we're putting into this body, because you want a car to run well, and it requires high test gasoline. You don't fill it up with low octane gas, or you don't change the oil every 100,000 miles. You change it more often. That's the same thing with our body. If we want our brains and our bodies to keep up with us, this generation should live well into the 100. They should make the 100 mark, but they're not going to, because they don't take care of their body. So as you think about that, think about this section. Aptitudes for school. We have ways of determining whether a student is prepared or not. We test probably from first grade, I would think so, to see if a child's ready to go into second grade or third grade or fourth grade. But then when we get to about the 10th grade, we begin to wonder whether a child has the aptitude necessary to go to college and do well. And so for umpteen years, they gave the SAT, PSAT, GRE, all those kind of tests. And then COVID came along and they disbanded those tests and haven't done anything with them yet, again. So that kind of left colleges short as far as knowing if a person is ready for college or not. And so that was always a big deal. In 10th grade, 11th grade, you took it twice, took the higher score. So how do we measure intelligence? Why were intelligence tests first developed? What were their features? And how well do intelligence tests work? How does the heredity and environment influence intelligence? And why is our test scores, why do they vary among racial and ethnic groups? Those are all really good questions to think about. There is a hierarchical view of intelligence. John Carroll in 1993 theorized that there were three levels of intelligence: the top, the G factor, general intelligence; the middle, 8 broad categories of intelligence; and then the lowest, which are several specific skills associated with each of the 8 subcategories. Theory is purely psychometrically driven, and it ignores research and theory on cognitive development. So he felt like that there was a hierarchy of intelligence. Gardner said, and remember we're looking at different models, multiple intelligences, that they're derived from several sources. 9 types of intelligence is what he was thinking. Linguistic, logical, mathematical, and spatial. And then 4 through 9, musical, bodily, kinesthetic, interpersonal, interpersonal, naturalistic, and existential. Each had a unique development history and was regulated by different areas of the brain in his model. Researchers began to look at other non-traditional aspects of intelligence, and probably the best known was emotional intelligence. You may have heard that word before, or the ability to use one's own or others' emotions to solve problems and live happily. Higher scores on relevant tests predict more satisfying interpersonal relationships, greater self-esteem, greater workplace effectiveness. So they're able to tie some of these scores to actual events in a person's life and how they feel and how they are reacting. So when you think about memory, think about testing, think about this section, and it's not always the best indicator, but it can be an indicator among others about a student's ability to do well. Sternberg's theory of successful intelligence is another idea. It's using one's ability to achieve personal goals. And he saw 3 different categories of personal goals: the analytical, that is generating different solutions; the creative, dealing adaptively with new situations and problems; and then the practical, knowing which solution will work. All this kind of leads to wisdom, balancing a person's interest with the interest of other people and society in general is when we reach our wisest point in our lives. Somebody said that when you get old enough to learn how to die, it's time to, or learn how to live, it's time to die. And that really does have some resonance with that. Binet and Simon were other researchers that created the first objective measure of intelligence. That's an important statement. Mental age, in which intelligence testing is a measure of a child's performance and corresponding to the chronological age of those whose performance equals the child. So first test to distinguish between bright and dull children, and then they would create bright children have a lot of advantages, and they are 8 years with a mental age of much older, mental age older than they are. So they might be 8-year-olds with a mental age of 10. Or adult children have a mental age younger than they are. If they're 6 years old and have a mental age of 3, then that poses a real problem. I think I mentioned to you before, my great nephew who's having the trouble with getting into school, I think that was part of his mental age was a lot younger than his cohorts, and so it made it difficult. There are 3 contemporary IQ tests that are important. The Stanford Binet's one is well known, and then there's the Wechsler and the Kaufman assessment battery for children that helps with determining the mental age and how well they do it. Do these tests work is a good question. IQ tests have been shown to predict school grades and achievement, test scores, years of education, all kinds of different things here, but the predictions are not perfect. And there's always the danger that if a student begins, does better than he could, that does happen sometimes, then it would give a false hope, of their success rate. It's supposed to be a predictor of the success rate in schools afterwards. IQ does have something to do with heredity. We talked about fraternal twins. Their IQ scores are less similar than those of identical twins because remember, they are 2 complete different entities. They come from 2 eggs and 2 sperm that fertilize at the same time and attach themselves to the uterine wall. So they don't have very much contact with each other as far as becoming like the other one. Adopted children's IQ scores are more similar to those of their biological parents than those of their adoptive parents, and that's really interesting. So IQ scores increased during the 20th century, and their use became almost standard. Children have greater IQ scores when the parents talk to their children. That's an interesting point. When they provide cognitively challenging materials, when they expose children to stimulating experiences outside the home, they go on field trips, they go to the zoo. They're constantly teaching their children something. They're spending time with them, talking to them. My little brother that I mentioned to you that is extremely smart in most areas, he would ask my dad to give him math problems at night. This is before he went to kindergarten. And my dad would write him out addition, subtraction, later multiplication problems, which greatly enhances IQ. The other sad note is that poverty contributes to struggling in school because of the lack of development and skills needed for success. Usually people that live in poverty have less education, have less time because they're working their butts off trying to eat, to spend with their children. So their children are left to, being taken care of by someone else or left on their own, and they don't tend to do as well because they lack the development skills that you get in a higher neighborhood. There's also the impact of ethnicity and socioeconomic status. Studies show the difference in IQs among ethnic groups: Asian Americans, European Americans, Hispanic Americans, African Americans. These differences are impacted by the socioeconomic status. However, IQ scores differences persist after accounting for a lot of other things as well. So it can be genetics, it can be environment that has a pretty tough result in the lives of children. So there's always the threat of stereotype. It's the fear of being judged in accordance with a negative stereotype about a group to which you belong, being self-fulfilling prophecy. You come from those people that live in Pumpkin Town. That was the town that everybody, all the dumb people lived in. And our school had a fit when they closed the high school in Pumpkin Town and routed all the students to Pickens, my high school. And we learned almost immediately that we're stereotyping someone because there were all kinds of different people in this group, and it was as diverse as anything else that you could think of. So be careful about stereotyping someone just because they are a certain color, certain ethnicity, certain background, come from the wrong side of the tracks. All those things that we grew up with hearing over and over are detrimental to a child's learning. A child will eventually perform according to the expectations that you have for it. If you have very low expectations for a child, 9 times out of 10, they're going to fulfill that. They want to please. And so if flunking out is what makes you happy as a parent, then they will probably try to do that. And a lot of parents have a lot of problems along this line here. So individuals, there's a lot of differences in abilities. Gifted children seem to be much more able to play the piano, play the cello, whatever, than just regular children. The giftedness is defined as the IQ score of 130 or higher. Giftedness today, the ability to substantially above average. So you find that those children have it a little bit easier in some ways. They don't do as well in the psychosocial areas of making friends or relating to other people or to family. They're kind of on the fringe somewhere. But when they sit down to play the piano, it's absolutely heavenly. And so these gifted children have a very high IQ, and we should think about it because you might very well interact with them along the journey somewhere. So it's really worth understanding. There are also children who have intellectual disabilities. Usually they'll emerge before they're 18. They have limited transactions and stuff like that. But there are four risks to that are important to. Let me see where my slide was here. Got lost. Okay, so let's go back a minute. We've jumped a couple of things here. 4 risk factors: biomedical, could be chromosomal, could be malnutrition, could be traumatic head injury, could be social, which would be poverty, poor parent-child relations, could be behavioral, like child neglect, domestic violence, education, poor parenting, poor services, poor availability of services. But a child with a learning disability has difficulty mastering an academic subject, is of normal intelligence, must not struggle due to some other condition like poor instruction, sensory deficiencies. But learning disabilities are diagnosed in about 5% of US age children. They are not mentally retarded. They're not physically retarded, is what this is saying, because they don't test that way. There are 3 very common of these that you hear quite a lot: the developmental dyslexia, which is reading disability, impaired reading comprehension, and departmental dyscalculia, which is mathematical disability. I think you will find this to be true, that there are such things as right brain, left brain people. People in math many times are better at math than most other people, and they're not good at anything else. People that are, I call it a humanities brain. If you like history and like writing and all those things, then you will certainly, your left brain, because that's the center where those things are developed. These all feed directly into academic skills, and you're going to read about that in your reading today. But there's some really important things here that you need to do: word recognition, the ability to read. Interesting to look back over my 66 years of being a student and realizing how reading has changed. When I started, everybody in class, probably 30, 35 people, were evaluated, and we had 3 reading groups. We had the super fast and the middle and the weakest, and the teacher worked with each group to help them impress their skills. And so we're seeing a lot of that coming back, and so it's really interesting. I want you to read this very carefully on reading and understanding what you're reading and why we have those things. Physical development is a positive thing. boys and girls. It helps their growth. It helps their mental growth and their ability to relate to each other in a different world than just a classroom. And so they provide some really great information here. And this is how you develop many of your motor skills, is by getting out and working them. There's lots of things to do if we would just get up and get out and do them. So when you think about that development, that is, 7, 8, 9 years old. That's when a child is very active. They want to join teams. They want to get involved with school. They may not be paying attention. Their grade suffers. And so we wonder, what are you going to do with them? It gets worse. So, hold on, grab your hat and hold on. But it's very important that we understand what's going on in their brain. And you ever ask your child that, what are you thinking? If we could change brains with them, we'd probably realize what the struggle is in this day to be what you need to be. Well, hopefully this chapter will be one that you'll read with interest and take from it the things I think will help to you. And we will see you next time with the next chapter. Thank you for your patience.